Good afternoon, everybody. This is Clay Barber and Jill Howell from Sound Rivers coming to y'all to do a recap video of our Pamlico paddle that we did in October this year. So I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to go over some highlights and challenges that we had while we were on this trip, but also we want to try and really gear this towards what you may need to think of if you're going to plan your own paddle trip on the Pamlico River or the Tarpamlico River. We have done both of them now, the whole river, and it was really exciting. It was really fun. So we've got a lot of cool stories, and we're going to try not to get too lost in the sauce of storytelling because we could very easily. But to kick things off, like I said, I'm Clay Barber, the Environmental Projects Coordinator, and my wonderful paddle partners were Jill and First Mate Miller, and that is your Pamlico Tar River keeper staring at you right there. With an awesome adventure dog that had a good time. I'm going to turn it over to her to talk about getting this trip started and what it took to plan this thing out.
Thanks, Clay. So this map here is really the first step of trip planning. It was the first step in our trip planning for last year for the Tour de Tar. And so when we decided to move forward with this paddle, it was about a month and a half before we were set to launch. And I'm not as familiar with the Pamlico section of the river, at least for paddling purposes, that I am with the Tar, and I think Clay was sort of the same way. So we knew when we wanted to go and how many days approximately we had. And I really liked the idea of picking up where we left off. So Washington was the natural start point. And then there was a lot of unknowns the further we moved away from Washington. And you can see that the different color lines are the different basically paddle sections. So the first day was yellow, the second day was orange, third day was pink, and so on. And you can see as we move further and further along in the week, the days get longer and longer as the conditions get worse and worse, or like more challenging, I should say. But a lot of that was kind of dictated by where we might be able to stay. So the little houses are where we ended up staying. One was a platform, and then basically every other spot, I guess there was a platform and a beach area, but the other locations were our members' houses. So there was some logistics that were dictating where we stopped and started. And I also wanted to make a detour to Blunt's Creek. I had never been up there, but we have some, I guess, ongoing litigation related to Blunt's Creek. So I wanted to head up there and highlight that as an issue. So I thought that was a worthy detour, as was the Pungo Creek detour. But this was kind of like the starting point of playing around with how far do we think we could make it in a day? Where did we want to see? Where could we skip over? So this is the start of it all.
And we have this slide kind of broken down day by day. So we're going to take turns kind of talking through our days. This day one was down at, we launched from Havens Garden, which is right in front of Inner Banks Outfitters and Backwater Jacks. It's a wildlife boat ramp that we actually installed a Easy Dock kayak launch onto as part of our recreational access work. So this launch that you're seeing in this shot is really new, and it's super snazzy. You can launch 2 kayaks at once off this thing. It's got handrails and seats and all sorts of ways to make it easier for folks to get in and out of their boat. People of all skill levels and all abilities and everything. So super excited to have that as our launch point. And we had a little land cleanup in the area right before we launched. So that was just a cool way to kind of get excited, get all these like-minded folks together to kind of see us off. And some of these folks wound up paddling with us. It was quite the chore getting everybody onto the ramp, getting all the boats packed and the dog in the boat. And there's a news reporter that wants to get a good shot of it. So it was kind of a whole scene. And then we shoved off on our trip the first day. If you see up in the top, we have our distance and time mapped out. This was based on our trip plan through Google Maps and through a GPS unit that I used throughout the trip. So our first day, a little under 9 miles, and we did it in about 4.5 hours. It was rough on that first day. You couldn't tell it by our launch scene here. It was all happy and chill and calm, and that's our director helping us load stuff up. This is me shoving off of the nice handrail system there and the rollers that if you see under the boat there that make it really easy to come on and off these docks. This was our final destination after our rather choppy intro into the Pamlico River. And you can see me peeling myself out of my sea kayak. That's a spray skirt that's around my waist, and it was pretty essential to the function of that boat in big waves. That boat is designed to slice through waves, and so water will come over the bow and it will come over the back. So you need something around your waist to keep the boat plugged up and from taking on water. But that sounds kind of weird, but the flip side is you have so much more control over your boat. It's a fast boat. It steers really well in big windy conditions and everything. So I enjoyed it. I also enjoyed these camping platforms that we have as part of the Pamlico River Water Trail. This is the Hinesley platform. It's located up Broad Creek a ways. It's super cool in the marsh, in the swamp, but beautiful and in good shape. We have a picnic table and pitched our hammocks, as you can see there. And it was a cold night, but it was a comfy night. Everybody stayed warm, and we had some really nice views to kind of round out the day, which was a great end to a first day, I would say. And Jill, take us through day 2.
Yeah, so day 2, the first 2 days were what we would consider like pretty short paddles. It was only about 8 miles, and we were crossing the river from Broad Creek to Blunts Creek, and conditions were better than the first day. I figured I'll take this opportunity to talk about, you saw the boat that Clay was in was really the boat that was meant for this trip, and I had to think about whether I wanted to be fast and efficient or bring my pup, and so I went with the latter, which meant I was you can sort of see it here, the boat in the right-hand picture in the forefront. I was in a 12-foot sit-on-top kayak. So it made for more stability. We did test out a boat with Miller. That was, actually, I think I was in Clay's boat and testing it out with Miller, and that would have made for a very shaky, very unpleasant ride for the both of us. So he was able to, for a while, stand in the back right behind me, and then later on in the trip was right at my feet. And that meant like packing needed to shift around a little bit for me. Most gear was shoved in Clay's kayak, and he was able to cut right through the waves and the water, and I was much slower. My boat was a little bit more unwieldy, had everything including the dog strapped to the dog was not strapped, but like all the gear was strapped to the boat. So not that it's not possible. You can definitely take a dog on a multi-day paddle trip. I would just think that there were moments where Clay and I were having very different days, where he was sort of, chilling, gliding through the water, and I was struggling to keep pace with him and to keep the dog in the boat. All that being said, it was possible, and we paddled 20 miles one day, and Miller was good, and I was good, and Clay made it too. So that was, it's sort of possible. Clay, if you want to jump to the next slide. Here's us being okay out on the water, and this is on the way to Blunts Creek. We stayed this night at Cotton Patch Landing, and Cotton Patch is not a traditional sort of like tent campground, but they allowed us to stay there for the night. This was one of the biggest challenges, was finding appropriate places to be able to sleep for the night, because there's not, unlike unlike a lot of the Tar where it's really undeveloped, so you can sort of pull off on the side of the riverbank, or there's plenty of camping platforms. The Pamlico is heavily developed along the banks until you get out towards the Pungo. And there's not a whole lot of like tent campground options. So we're glad to have some folks let us stay there. And then that evening, we really like lived a life of luxury at dinner time. We ate very, very well. This is Bob Daw. He lives up on Blunt's Creek and had us over for a fish fry and some music, which was amazing. We definitely didn't go hungry all trip. And so that was like a really fun way to see folks up on Blunt's Creek. He's been involved in the Blunt's Creek fight against a mine that would essentially be discharging a ton of water into that creek and really completely changing the ecosystem. So that was a really, really cool evening that we had there.
Yeah, Bob does a real mean Proud Mary cover. Just throwing that out there. Guy's got a great voice. Day 3. This is the slide that we used to start this PowerPoint off with, but this was the day that we took that photo. This is the Cotton Patch Landing right out front on a foggy morning. So that was just a really pretty spot to be at, a good start to the day. It was a little over 12 miles that day. We knocked it out in a little under 6 hours. So that's pretty on par. Your average paddler goes about 2 miles an hour in general conditions and with general ability. So, you know, that number gets affected by what kind of boat you're in, your experience level, what you're packing, all sorts of good stuff. But that's what we did that for day 3, Blunt's Creek to Bath Creek. It was really calm in the morning. It was nice. Miller was making himself at home there, as you can see. We had originally planned to eat lunch on the banks of Camp Body, which is a scout camp right down the river from the mouth of Blunt's Creek. But when we got there, the fish kill was so bad that we did not want to eat lunch amongst
I could not eat
all of
tuna
this right here. Yeah.
It wasn't gonna work.
And we went up and down quite a ways to try and find a spot that was not so fishy, but after a few minutes, we just kicked it all the way over across the river to Goose Creek State Park, and it was much nicer over there. That just has to do with the way the wind was blowing that day. We kind of played tag with this fish kill the whole way down the river, which was kind of the bitter part of the bittersweetness of river ecosystems. I mean, unfortunately, fish kills are kind of to be expected every year now. It doesn't mean that it's okay, and but it's an important thing to not ignore. So we did not ignore it on this trip. We really didn't have a choice. But once we got to our nice, like, white sand beach stay spot, it was, we kind of forgot about that because we were up Bath Creek enough to be out of the main channel and out of the main flow. And it was really nice there. This is a popular, like, recreation spot. A lot of people come here. It's not a huge beach, but it's just a nice flat sandy spot. And Miller, as you can see, was enjoying it a lot. He was very cozy. He got to run his paws off on the beach, which was welcome after being in the kayak for the day. This is Jill's Riverside Bistro Cafe and pub and all the other places that you can serve food wrapped into one. This is pretty typical for when we eat on the side of the river and prepare food ourselves. I use quotation marks because it's usually something that we just add hot water to. And this was some backpackers pasta in that case. What can I say? We're simple beings, and when we do trips like this, things like extravagant amounts of dishes and lots and lots of different types of food and specialty items, you might say, luxury items. It adds up when you're paddling around with it all day. So at the end of the day, we're tired. We just need some fuel for the next day. So they make some pretty good stuff, but that's usually what's on the menu.
I think that before you jump into your next thing, Clay, I think it really helps to find a paddling partner that aligns with you on this mentality. Clay and I both are not morning people who are okay with with instant coffee and granola bars to and then half asleep get into boats. We understand that may not be the way for everybody. And then lunches we're pretty much wraps and tuna and cheese. What we would call a sandwich, but many others would probably not call that a sandwich. And for dinners, I feel like anything tasted good, and if it's just pasta, I don't know, that can be pretty delicious. So find yourself a paddling partner who's pretty aligned with either being all in for food and being prepared for long cooks and lots of cleanup, or do what we did, and really it was about fueling up.
Yeah, I mean, we had a mission, if we were just out here gallivanting around and spending the night on the beach, we'd probably build a fire and, have a nice extravagant menu. You can definitely do all that in these places, especially kind of, this is probably a good point to say from here back to Washington is pretty accessible by boat. You can kind of get to all these places in not very long a time. But we had a timeline to keep to. We had a certain amount of space in our boats, a certain amount of energy to paddle a certain amount of weight. So here we are doing this, and Jill's right. Whoever you're adventuring with, it's good to have a nice long chat about what you value and expect from your adventure before you get stuck out in the middle of nowhere with them for 5 minutes. Luckily, we're doing pretty good. This was just our gorgeous sunset that we had that evening to kind of put everybody to sleep, which wasn't hard because we were tired. And Jill, look at Miller having fun on day 4. You want to talk about the long day, first long day?
Sure. Yeah. So the last 2 days were really the toughest for a number of reasons, both in terms of distance, paddling conditions, basically open water, and I guess general safety. So for the 20 mile or that 20-ish mile days, it's important to if you're going to do a big trip like this, especially in a place like the Pamlico heading out towards the Sound, let somebody know where you're at. We had lots of folks who knew generally where we were going to try to be at any given time. When you're paddling 20 miles a day, you need to get up with the sun and hope that you can make it there by sunset. So we were paddling the entire day, and this was the Marine Patrol came out and paid us a visit to make sure we were okay. She was out on her patrol, and somebody let her know that we were out there. So Miller was glad to be on some stable boat for a little while. And this day we also had Heather and Vale, our ED and communications director, come out and say hi and take some photos, but basically let somebody know where you're generally supposed to be, especially when you're on water that is we didn't really have a get off the water plan at this point. There was plenty of boat piers, and I'm sure somebody would have taken pity on us if we washed up on somebody's pier or somebody's yard, but we didn't really have an exit plan that a midway boat ramp or some sort of public land to get off on, just because there was no access to that. So if possible, it's ideal to sort of have a plan like that. The other thing, Clay, I think if you go to the next picture, so we went right through the path of the ferry, which we knew ahead of time, but stuff like that is super important to find out also. So this is the ferry that heads over to Aurora. So as we saw it off in the distance, we hung back and waited for it to make its path. There was not a whole lot of boat traffic at all. I think between the ferry and the Marine Patrol and Heather and Vale, I think there was a handful of fishermen this day also who had been warning us about the weather that was supposed to be happening the next day, but really boat traffic turned out to not be an issue like I thought it would be. But just knowing, major like areas of boat traffic or ferry traffic or what have you is pretty important. We do not go fast in kayaks, especially loaded down kayaks. So we needed to make sure we were in the right spot all the time. And this night so it was a long day, and we got there just before sunset. And we ended up at Mary and Uli Alfonser's house. Mary was a former ED of Sound Rivers. They were gracious enough to host us and fed us a delicious pasta meal. We're very glad that we didn't have that in the beginning of the week because all of my
It was so good. Oh my
terrible. We ate so much pasta, like so much lasagna. It was amazing. And we were tired from that day, and we also knew that, no matter, like, we were exhausted, but we also had quite the day ahead of us. And the other thing just on safety is we spent a portion of this evening and then the next morning looking at the weather and the wind, and knowing that the conditions were about to be, the most open water. There was not a way for somebody to come and scoop us if we needed to get off the water early. We needed to make a decision pretty early on in the route if we were going to get off a couple miles into the journey or like try to make it the whole way to Swan Quarter. So there was lots of like logistical planning and evaluating that evening, as you should always do if you're going to be making a trip like this.
Yeah, this was before we get to the last day. A lot of people on our trip helped us out, but a lot of people shared a lot of concern. They were like, and it's just because they were concerned for our safety and well-being, and they probably think we're a little crazy. And we took a long time and sat down with them and talked about what conditions usually look like out there to them under the forecast that was coming the next day, and what they know from the local area and waters, and we had to really think to ourselves what our own abilities and skills were, and what we were willing to kind of put ourselves through. And we just decided that we could handle it, that we were going to do it. It was important to us to do it, even if it was going to be really hard and a little uncomfortable. But those are important conversations and decisions to have before you launch, even if it takes a whole long time and there's a lot of back and forth. If either one of us had not been, confident, or if somebody was too nervous or whatever, that would have been a great time to say, you know what, we'll just stay around tomorrow and eat lots more lasagna and go the next day, because you got to have that flexibility. But we wound up doing it. And real quick before, just to go back to here, this talking about decision making. When the Marine Patrol officer came and found us, we were standing on a little spit of sand that was about 2 feet by 2 feet. I mean, it was nothing. You couldn't call it a beach. It was a get out spot with it's just tall grass everywhere, which doesn't sound appealing, right? Why the heck would we stop there? Just around the corner was house after house after house with pier after pier after pier. And we actually had somebody offer up for us to get out and eat lunch on their pier. But
somebody we didn't know.
Yeah, we didn't really know them. And I mean, that wasn't the biggest thing. The biggest thing was we were tight on our time, really tight. And the thought of getting Miller and ourselves out of our low boats onto a high pier to have a nice chit chat conversation with somebody, and to have a leisurely lunch, and then to get back in the boats and everything, sounded like there was no way we were going to be able to do that and like maintain our time. So we opted for this little spit of sand and grass so that Miller could just hop out, run around for a minute. We smashed our lunch like super fast, like as the waves were just hitting us. And then the Marine Patrol officer pulled up and kind of laughed at us and chit-chatted for a while. And then we were back on back on the go. So that was definitely an on the fly decision. It may seem counterintuitive, but you know, you got to be able to make those decisions on the fly.
And of everybody that we encountered, the Marine Patrol officer, really the only one who had any ability to save us, was the only one who was like, yeah, you two will be all right. You'll be able to make it. So the next day when we're really, pushing it, we knew she wasn't coming to rescue us because she had faith that we'd get there.
Yeah, bittersweet encouragement. She was really cool. But
Yeah.
Our last day, day 5, this sign is a good marker of like when things started to get hard. This is like how it started. Okay. Nice,
Beautiful.
calm, beautiful sunset or sunrise. This is still up in the Pungo at Mary and Ollie's house. But when we got back out to the main river and started, the whole shoreline is like these grasses, which, it's not rocky or anything. It's just kind of mud and peat, but it's not comfortable to get out on either or convenient or anything. So this is kind of what it looked like for the rest of the trip, except the waves got huge. And if you look at this picture on the right, it looks choppy, like mildly choppy. But one thing that we found in trying to put this together was that we couldn't find a photo or a video that we took on the last day that really expressed what we were going through. Something about the optics of a lens just can't describe how far up and down we were going every time a wave came under, or how the wind would shift like every 2 seconds, it felt like. And right when you feel like you're going the right way, a wave comes from some other side and gets you wet, and now you got to reassess where you're going. So this is where the GPS really came in the clutch. When this is about all the landmarks that you have, we really had to depend on knowing where we had to be at a certain time, knowing how fast we were going, and knowing where we are. So it was a constant switch between checking our place on the phone, on our map, checking how fast we were going on our GPS and in what direction we were heading, and keeping an eye on the time and the sun and the conditions, and trying to find our cut throughs and the inlets and stuff. So it was a navigationally challenging and physically challenging day. And I don't know that I've been so excited to ever see a boat ramp. But after going through the last 2 hours just felt like we were in a washing machine. It was nuts. But Jill's boat started taking on water, like on the inside. It's a sit on top kayak, but it's hollow. That's why it floats. And in really tough situations, or if something's not hooked up right, water can really get in there. She was having trouble steering on the last couple 100 yards. It turned into a real slog. And so to get to the end at sunset, like on the dot, was just like, yes, it was such a satisfying end to the trip. And Grace came down and picked us up and drove us back to the office, and we were back to business as usual. And this is why we kind of come back to recap these things, because it was this long, epic trip that took all this preparation, and it was this whole great big thing. And then, we might have had a weekend. I can't remember when we ended, but, then we're right back in the office going after some of the issues that we found on our trip, and, fielding reporters and are back into grant projects, and just coming back and seeing all these photos is like super cool for me. So I'm happy that we came back and did this recap. That kind of goes by our day-to-day slides. So Jill, did you have any last thoughts?
Yeah, my only sort of takeaways, especially from the last day, definitely a slog. It's remarkable how much the river feels more like an ocean. Those last 2 days, heading towards the Pungo, and then really once we got back to the Pamlico after getting out of the mouth of the Pungo, it really felt like we were in the ocean. Not even Pamlico Sound, just you couldn't really see across to the other shoreline. There was no horizon. Really just open water, no development, very beautiful, but definitely felt like we were out in the ocean, not on the river. And then just as far as the conditions, I mean, I think looking back now, I don't need to do that again. It was very challenging, and I remember, like, couldn't really see land on either side. I had been convinced that in this sort of like bay area, once we got off of the river, the last half of the day was going to be easy. It was going to be protected. We were in this bay, but really it was like a washing machine, as Clay said. But when I sort of like took a minute, was being rolled around by the waves, like knew that I wasn't going to flip over. Miller was whiny, but he was fine. Clay had his GPS, never felt like we were in danger or out of our, I guess out of our wheelhouse in terms of ability. It just was a little bit uncomfortable, and not fun. I wasn't having fun when we were doing that, but never felt like we were necessarily like in danger. And that sort of gets to like best laid plans. I've been warned and was really ready for the Pungo to be a slog, both getting up there and getting back down. And I don't know if it was the time of day or the weather, but like really the Pungo was not an issue at all. And I was not prepared for how tough that last leg would be heading towards Swan Quarter. So best laid plans, got to be prepared for anything. And then just my last sort of takeaway, less about, how to do this in the future, but like why I wanted to do this. I'm sure I don't want to speak for Clay, but I think he might feel a little similarly. The trip last year was an awesome adventure at a time when like we weren't able to do everything we wanted to because of COVID. And this year came around, and again we had to cancel a lot of things. And I know for me, seeing the river last year gave me a lot more, knowledge basically about the area that I'm charged with protecting. And really wanted to have this sense of like, had been on the entire river, and still it's not quite complete because we didn't make it all the way down the Pamlico. But really having this sense of like knowing a place because you spent all day out on it was something that I wanted. And again, because we had to cancel so many in-person things this fall, being able to like share this with members and have folks follow along our series of misadventures, I think was really great. I think I'll end there. Clay, I don't know if you want to end things out for us with your final thoughts and then wrap up.
I echo that. I mean, it was an awesome trip. Definitely boost your confidence whenever you've been there and done that, and then somebody asks you for advice or tips or whatever, and you can come from a place of experience. It's really cool. And also it's good for your soul. It can be a tough job in the environmental conservation nonprofit world. There's a lot of ups and downs, there's a lot of challenges. It can seem like an endless fight sometimes, but when you're out on the river for multiple days and you see how gorgeous it is and how our activities as humans affect these ecosystems, and you see some of the you see people enjoying the river, or you see people that may not be able to enjoy the river, it really reminds you of why we're all here trying to fight for clean water and for everybody's access to clean water, to do things like this. So it definitely keeps me going whenever we do these trips like this. That's why I think we should do it every year if we can. So I think that's the plan right now. We haven't gotten around to next year, but I'm sure it's on the docket for 2022. And with that, I'll just say thank you to everybody that sponsored this trip. We had a lot of businesses and organizations and people along the river that just chipped in here and there, gave us places to stay, food, financial donations, gear. Shout out to Inner Banks Outfitters, Knee Deep Adventures, and all the people that gave us dry bags and all these things that, of course, we didn't have at the last minute or thought would be super crucial. So thanks everybody to help us do this paddle. We look forward to doing more of these things. And we look forward to seeing all of you out on the Tar Pamlico or Neuse rivers, because hey, we do both. So maybe we'll have to expand to the Neuse next year. And with that, we will see y'all next time. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. If you have any questions about this, send them to info@soundrivers.org or Facebook or anything, and we will work to answer your questions and do what we can. All right, yeah.
Thanks,
See
everybody.
you later.